Good morning, USA. Welcome to the Burn Your Bus show. Would like to give you a thought here, two thoughts. One thought about neoliberalism again, and the other thought about how elitist journalists don't have a connection with the suffering of regular people. So let's start with Caitlin Johnstone, one of the most brilliant editorialists, journalists. She deserves the word journalist. I only know about 3 or 4 journalists that deserve the name, and she's one of them. She wrote an article recently that's on medium.com called "This is Everything That is Wrong with Mainstream Feminism." And she's bold. She writes about things that sound on the face of it politically incorrect. And admittedly, some of her followers are libertarians and conservatives, but she is an absolute leftist. And so when she says things like that and she resonates with people on all sides of the political spectrum, there's nothing wrong with that. What she's really advocating for is freedom, and that's what should unite all of us. And you can feel that flavor in what she says here. I excerpted this quote. "Many men will knee-jerk argue that they too are slaves to the corporatocracy, and that's true. That's what you get when you don't change a valuing system that was created by slave owners to distract their slaves from killing them and to keep them working anyway. That's what you get when you insist everyone change to suit a system that was created by power to keep power in place. We laugh about how indigenous people were fooled into handing over vast swaths of their land for handfuls of shiny shells, while we hand over our labor, our land, our rights, and our freedoms for paper rectangles today. It's not the only things we hand over. We hand over the joy of sharing time with our families and friends. We hand over the joy of the arts, of learning about music and art and theater and dance and sculpting and pottery, and we have handed over our ability to think that our lives belong to us and that we should be able to enjoy them without feeling like we're wasting our time. I'm an educator, and the biggest problem I have with the education system is it teaches us to keep being good slaves in the way she describes. So that's the problem, the root problem with neoliberalism. She puts it so perfectly. It's a system created by power to keep power in place. It's like Maggie Thatcher and Ronald Reagan when they insisted that the market is more important, more in front, priority-wise, than the lives of individual people. How is that freedom? It doesn't sound like freedom to me. It sounds like when markets are more important than the individual people, then people are slaves to the market. And the people who benefit are a tiny, minuscule portion of the population. So those are the slave owners and we are the slaves. That's what neoliberalism perpetuates. When you hear people from Third Way, when you hear people who speak for Wall Street about what's good for Wall Street, when you hear hedge fund managers and central bankers and the Fed chairman and other people like that, that's a tiny, tiny slice of humanity, and they're telling us what we should value. They're telling us what's important. And that's not where our values should be coming from. So that's a problem, and I was going to get to that yesterday. That's a problem that elitist journalists have when they're reporting about problems in places like Youngstown, Ohio, or Flint, Michigan. You could say they don't give a shit about those people, which is, you wouldn't be wrong to say that, but they have no connection. They have no emotional skin in that game. They have no way to really feel the empathy they would need to feel what the people who suffer in our current economy are feeling. And unless you feel that suffering, whether you feel it firsthand or whether you are just empathetic, you can't report on what's going on with markets or with trade agreements or anything in the field of economics. You can't report on those things with any kind of objectivity, with any kind of subjectivity. That's what we really need, and that's a problem here that Cohen, I think Jeff Cohen, is going to explain here in a review of his upcoming movie, The Corporate Coup d'Etat. I explained yesterday that he has worked directly with mainstream news outlets, so he's qualified to say what he's about to say.
Yeah. Well, it's a tough one because, I worked in the mainstream media. I worked at CNN. I worked at MSNBC. I was even at Fox News the first 5 years. So I've seen these people up close. You touched on something important. They are disconnected from working class people of all colors. And they don't get what working class people have been going through in recent decades. Because remember, salaries are going up in the media, at the Times, at the Post, at CNN and MSNBC. When I worked at MSNBC right before the Iraq invasion, I earned more money that 1 year than I'd earned in the previous 5 or 6 working at FAIR. So, I mean, these people are out of touch, and then that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is all of their sources are pushing them in a certain direction. Katie Halper had this wonderful investigative piece investigating the New York Times coverage of Bernie Sanders, especially as written by the young reporter who came out of Wall Street, who they've appointed to cover the Bernie Sanders campaign, and her name is Sydney Ember. And so besides the cluelessness, it's that who are they surrounded by, these elite reporters? They're surrounded by these think tanks.
Third way.
And these Democratic leadership people
Pelosi,
that are
Schumer,
equally
Perez.
Disconnected from the working class, who keep telling them, gee, if we have transformative proposals against Wall Street or for minimum wage or Medicare for all or public college free for everyone, that's going to scare away the swing voter. And as you see in our movie, where we actually interviewed definitively swing voters, that's exactly the program they wanted to hear. Yes. They want to hear transformative proposals that will do something about income inequality. Now, the swing voters, by definition, they're not Black Lives Matter activists. They're not pro-choice activists. That's what makes them swing voters. They're non-ideological, they're nonpartisan, sometimes called low information voters. But they warmed up to Bernie because he had these proposals. And then when Hillary becomes the nominee, they jump to Trump because he was proposing big things. But it's only in the elite media and these Third Way and Center for American Progress, these so-called center-left think tanks that are funded by Wall Street and the big corporations. It's only there that they think, gee, if you preach incremental, slow, status, don't rock the boat changes, you're going to get these swing voters back. They're utterly clueless. And if we leave it to them and they win out, Trump will be reelected.
And what I find also...
if we leave them out, Trump will be reelected. I'll leave you with a few talking points I've been working up. They're not exactly finished yet, but I'll share them with you in progress. Trump won in 2016 because he campaigned in the Rust Belt on Bernie's trade positions and carried Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. NAFTA, which we've been talking about yesterday especially, NAFTA left devastation in these states. TPP would be even worse. I've been reading up on this. There are about 14 different trade agreements, and they're all pernicious. They're all predatory. They're all more or less predatory, so you have to figure out what each one does. But they were written by corporations for the benefit of corporations, and then slipped under the tablecloths of the Congress people who have put them into law. So if your goal is to defeat Trump, logic dictates that you must support Bernie. Only Bernie will unite most Democrats, Bernie or busters, Bernie or Trumpers, and those who will vote blue no matter who. We demand, we lefties who will not put up with neoliberalism, we demand fundamental change in government. We demand single-payer Medicare for all, free college tuition, an end to regime change wars, an end to American empire. We demand a climate policy that bans fracking, new oil extraction, and an end to subsidies to oil companies. We demand a rapid transition to clean energy sources. We demand improvements to our infrastructure and full employment. This will please Steve Grumbine of the progressive, what is his group called? Real Progressives. He's all about modern monetary theory and all about full employment. He's been having some fisticuffs with Tulsi Gabbard over this. And I agree with Stephen. Full employment with a living wage for all Americans who desire it. That's one of his central tenets. And I think that Bernie is on board with that, even though it's tricky for him to say so in public. We demand an end to corporate welfare. We demand fiscal policies that shift the wealth back to the workers of this vastly wealthy country. My unique perspective is, because I'm a part-time truck driver, that the trucking industry, as represented by a Facebook group that you can look up called Black Smoke Matters, I say that with apologies to Black Lives Matter. That group, 26,000 or so truckers, are similar in the way they look at life to the swing voters that Cohen called the low information voters. But they're wising up. They're realizing that Trump was saying things to lure them that didn't turn out to be true. A lot of truck drivers, based on a pretty big sample size, if you look at the 26,000 or so on this Facebook group, they're wising up and they're saying, no, Trump didn't deliver on his promises. What else can we do? And in Cohen's movie trailer, there was somebody saying, if we don't have Trump, we'll just find another Trump, some other demagogue, some other bully who will say the right things to us, a charlatan, make no mistake, but somebody who will say populist things and get us on board again. How much better it would be to get someone like Bernie who will deliver, who actually believes what he's saying, who isn't intending to mislead the swing voters. How much better to have someone like him leading the charge, because things will get ugly. These truckers are talking about shutting down the country the way Brazil and Venezuela truckers have done in their countries. This isn't pretty. This is going to be a big, ugly mess. And the elitist third way, American progress, those people that Cohen mentioned, are totally and utterly clueless. And if you tell them the truth, then they remain oblivious on purpose, intentional oblivion. And the outcome is not going to be good. All right, unshaved, unbathed, unedited, unscripted, fueled by coffee and whatever organic tastiness I can entice you with. I hope to see you tomorrow and in the future. Stay connected.